In the previous video, we installed Windows Server 2025. Now, let's take the next step and configure this server as a domain controller using Active Directory domain services. We'll also configure DNS, create a domain user, and join a Windows 11 client to our new domain. Let's get started. The server name and static IP address were already configured in our previous video. Before we install Active Directory domain services, I'm setting the preferred DNS server to the server's own IP address, which is 192.168.0.10. Now let's continue with the Active Directory installation. From Server Manager, click Add Roles and Features and click Next. Select Role-Based or Feature-Based Installation, then click Next. Here, select our server from the server pool. We can see the server name and its IP address, so select the server and click Next. Now, under Server Roles, select Active Directory Domain Services and DNS Server. Active Directory Domain Services will provide our domain and authentication services, while DNS is required for Active Directory to locate and communicate with the domain services. On the Features page, we'll keep the default selections. The required features, including Group Policy Management and .NET Framework, are already selected, so there's nothing to change here. Click Next through the following pages until we reach the confirmation screen. Here, I'm unchecking Restart the destination server automatically because we'll restart the server manually when needed. Finally, click Install to begin installing the selected roles and features. The installation will take some time to complete. Once it's finished, close the installation window and go to the notification flag in the top right corner of Server Manager. Click the notification, then select Promote this server to a domain controller. We are now in the Active Directory Domain Services Configuration Wizard. Under Deployment Configuration, select Add a New Forest, because this is the first domain controller in our lab. For the root domain name, I'm using srtech.local. Then click Next. On the Domain Controller Options page, we'll keep the default settings for the DNS Server and Global Catalog. We also need to set a password for Directory Services Restore Mode. DSRM is a special recovery mode used to perform maintenance or recover Active Directory if the domain controller has a serious problem. I'll set a password and keep it safely stored. Then click Next. On the DNS delegation page, we'll leave Create DNS Delegation unchecked. Since we're creating a completely new forest for our lab, there is no existing parent DNS zone that needs to be delegated. Click Next. Here we can see the automatically generated NetBIOS domain name, srtech. We'll keep the default name and click Next. Here we can see the three main storage locations. The Database folder stores the Active Directory database, the Log Files folder stores Active Directory transaction logs, and SYSVOL stores domain-related files such as group policy data and logon scripts. We'll keep the default paths and click Next. The wizard is now checking the prerequisites required to promote this server to a domain controller. The checks have completed successfully, so we're ready to continue. Click Install to begin the domain controller promotion. The installation will take some time, and the server will restart automatically when required. After the restart, our Windows Server 2025 machine will be running as a domain controller with Active Directory domain services. The installation is now complete, and our Windows Server has restarted as a domain controller. From Server Manager Tools, we can now see Active Directory users and computers, DNS, and other Active Directory management tools. Before we continue, let's verify our DNS configuration. Open the Network Adapter IPv4 properties. Here we can see that the DNS configuration is using the local loopback address 127.0.0.1. For our lab, I'll configure the preferred DNS server to use the domain controller's IP address, which is 192.168.0.10. Now let's open DNS Manager from the Server Manager Tools menu. Expand our DNS server, srtech-srv-dc, and then expand Forward Lookup Zones. Here we can see our Active Directory domain, srtech.local. Inside the zone, we can see the A record for our domain controller, pointing to its IP address 192.168.0.10. This confirms that DNS is correctly resolving our domain controller's hostname to its IP address. Now let's open Command Prompt and verify our domain controller configuration. First, I'll run hostname to confirm the server name. Next, I'll run whomi to confirm that we're logged in with the administrator account. Then I'll run ipconfig/all to verify the server's IP address, default gateway, and DNS configuration. Next, I'll use NSLOOKUP to test DNS resolution for our domain, srtech.local. We can see that the domain is resolving to our domain controller's IP address. Finally, I'll run DCDIAG to perform a basic health check of the domain controller. The tests are passing successfully, which confirms that our domain controller is working correctly. Next, let's open Active Directory users and computers from the Server Manager Tools menu. First, we'll create an organizational unit, OU, to keep our users organized. Right-click our domain, srtech.local, select New Arrow Organizational Unit, and give it a name. I'm calling it srtech users. Now inside this new OU, let's create a user. Right-click the OU, select New User, and enter the user's name and logo name. The domain is already selected, so we'll keep the default domain and continue. Now let's set a password for the user. Depending on your requirements, you can choose options such as user must change password at next logon. For this lab, I'm leaving those options unchecked. Click Next, then Finish. Our domain user has now been created inside the srtech users organizational unit. Next, we'll move to our Windows 11 client and join it to the srtech.local domain. Now let's move to our Windows 11 client. Before joining the domain, we need to configure the client to use our domain controller as its DNS server. Open the Ethernet adapter properties, select IPv4, and set the preferred DNS server to our domain controller's IP address, 192.168.0.10. Now press Windows+R, type sysdm.cpl, and open the system properties. Under Computer Name, click Change, select Domain, and enter our domain name, srtech.local. Windows will ask for domain credentials, so enter the domain administrator username and password. If everything is configured correctly, we'll see a message welcoming this computer to the srtech.local domain. Click OK and restart the computer. After restarting, our Windows 11 client is now successfully joined to the srtech.local domain. Now, let's log in using the domain user we created earlier inside our srtech users organizational unit. I'll enter the domain user credentials, and as you can see, the user has successfully logged in. This confirms that our Windows 11 client is communicating with the domain controller and that domain authentication is working correctly. This completes our Active Directory domain controller setup. In the upcoming videos, we'll continue building our Windows Server lab with an additional domain controller, DHCP server, group policy management, and eventually, failover clustering. We'll configure each of these step by step and test them in our lab. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.